All right, today we're going to talk about pivoting, which is probably one of the most critical skills an entrepreneur can have. No matter what happens with your plan, it's not going to go forward for 5 years or 10 years. It actually may not go forward for 10 days. We talk about pivoting was like we always say here, being a jet ski. You don't want to be a battleship, which is hard to turn. You want to be a jet ski. If your market tells you want to go one way, you got to go that way. If your customers tell you to go one way, you got to go that way. Sometimes things pop up and it's out of your control and your market shrinks. One of the best pivoters in the history of man, probably the best pivoter in the history of man, was John Rockefeller, and he was born in 1839. John Rockefeller came from very simple means. His father was basically a snake oil salesman. He built himself to become the richest person in the history of man. And how did he do it? He really did it a couple ways. He did it by 3 massive pivots, but how he started was the oil rush was coming, and people were drilling for oil and drilling for oil and drilling for oil. Well, guess what? They missed most of the time. You spent all this money drilling for oil and you got nothing, or you got salt water or whatever else came out of the ground. So what Rockefeller decided to do is he says, I'm going to be a customer that I'm going to refine the oil and make kerosene. At this point in the world, there was no light bulbs or anything, so kerosene is what lit up homes. And so he took all the oil from all these folks and started creating kerosene and started lighting up homes. And what happened at the beginning was the kerosene was fairly unstable. You could light it, you get a nice torch. Sometimes you light it, you get a kind of an explosion, starting homes on fire. And so he went out and he regulated, and he did research, and he figured out how to make the kerosene safer. That was the first thing he did, because other people were selling kerosene, but his kerosene became the standard, which became Standard Oil, which was a safer kerosene. So now his customers felt they had to have Rockefeller Standard Oil kerosene so their house didn't burn down. So as Rockefeller's kerosene became Standard Oil and people wanted it, he only could ship it one way, which was the railroads. Back then there were only 2 railroads going at it, the Pennsylvania Railroad and Vanderbilt. And he was playing them against each other, and he had tremendous leverage on these folks. I believe he had over 50% of their business was shipping his kerosene. And what happened was the 2 railroad companies got together and said, let's jack his price. We're the only 2 options he has. So they did. They jacked his price, and he tried to play one against the other. He realized they were in cahoots with each other. Now think about that. You have one way to ship your product, and these folks are jacking your pricing, making it so expensive that it's going to be difficult for him to service his customers. So what does he do? He's in the back of his plant one day, and he's looking around, he sees all these pipes. So pivot number 1, and a massive pivot. This guy decides to build a pipeline. Right, 100 miles or so, whatever it was, pipeline, unheard of in the industry, unheard of for the times. And he basically said, if these folks aren't going to ship my kerosene at an adequate price that I can live with, I'm going to go around them. What a massive pivot. Other people just give up, raise their price, make their product too expensive. It would invite in competition. He decides to build his own pipelines. Massive pivot number 1. And think about it. His transportation costs after he built the pipeline were now 0. So he went from paying the railroads for transportation to turning it into a massive win on his first major pivot, which of course created a tremendous amount of wealth for him. So Rockefeller's business is booming, right? He's got the nice consistent kerosene. People are feeling more comfortable using his product. Along comes Edison with the light bulb, and that's not good news when you're selling kerosene to light people's homes. So he recognized it right away. You know, all entrepreneurs are visionary. They try to look and see what the future is. He recognizes that he can't fight the electric light bulb, that it's a safer technology, it makes more sense, it's going to be readily available in the house, it doesn't have to get delivered. And so he says he has to find another use for his kerosene. So he does find other uses, none of them really major, until he starts looking into the gasoline market. And at that point, gasoline, when it was being refined, 80% of it was scrap, it was volatile, wasn't consistent, explosions. And so he puts a ton of money in R&D again and says, okay, I got to pivot again. So he looks into how does he make gas more consistent, more available to the common man. Henry Ford's starting to come around in the early 1900s. The internal combustion engines are starting to be looked at. Planes, things like that are coming along. He knew he wanted to be part of that. So he did find a way to refine gasoline, so it's about 80% efficient, not 80% scrap. Drives the cost down, which of course brings it more available to the masses, and does a massive pivot. Think about your business. If your market totally dried up, most people would give up, sell their stuff, auction it off, and call it a day. Not the great entrepreneurs. They find a way to pivot. So his third pivot was massive again, and he gets involved in the internal combustion engine. The Standard Oil becomes a great gasoline supplier, a consistent gasoline supplier, becomes the best product on the market. And again, he pivoted and got the job done. Just remember, as you grow your business, you may not run into these massive problems that Rockefeller ran into and have to pivot through those. You will have to pivot. You will have to pivot a lot. So embrace pivoting. Always think differently. Always think of different ways of selling your product. If you can embrace pivoting, you're going to have a lot better chance of being a success. Thank you.